Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here this morning, Sarah. I was wondering if you could potentially answer this, and maybe it's a tonight question, maybe it's a later answer. We've heard a lot of feedback tonight that why bother with this? It's not going to protect anyone. It's not going to catch anyone. And I was wondering if you could speak to the proposal that is in front of all of us and give us your feedback on that.
Yeah. Well, that's the million-dollar question, right? And a very important one to ask and test and think about. And I have given that a lot of thought. What would make the most difference? There's no perfect system. We don't have a perfect system now, in my view, because in my experience, and I have reviewed a lot of terrible things that happen to children over the last many, many years of my career. In Connecticut, parents, guardians, responsible adults can do and have removed their children with no follow-up, and they're not educating at a minimum, right? So that's the now. That's the system now. Is that any of the folks here to know? But that does happen, right? I also don't think it happens as rarely as people think it may think it happens, and not based on what I've seen and reviewed. So when I look at the bill, that's the lens I look at it through. I think about all these different scenarios, all these different cases that I've seen over the years, from the Matthew Tirado fatality investigation that some folks are familiar with here and some are probably not, but I've heard referenced here a few times. That's actually the child I think about a lot, because as some folks have pointed out, I think Attorney Stevenson pointed out in her testimony, which I heard a part of but not all of, Matthew Tirado, who was a teenage boy with developmental disabilities who died a horrific death in his home after a massive failure by the child welfare system, even no question about it, and other systems. He was not homeschooled. He has not been withdrawn, but his sister had been. She had been withdrawn, and not long, maybe I don't know, within a couple months of his death, she had been withdrawn from school. So I think about these provisions and some of the ones that the folks have been talking about today, sort of through that lens. So my answer is one, I do think that if there's a framework, and this is what I think, right, that if there's a framework that folks have to follow, districts, schools, that will deter some individuals who might otherwise use the lack of a framework as a guise to remove their child from school very easily. Two, if there was a check, notwithstanding the merits of that provision right now, but if there was a check in that case, right, whoever mom went to in Hartford Public Schools to take that little girl out of school, they had to check, that would have seen she had an open case, right? And she would not have been allowed to be removed from school. And that would have forced some other reckoning in the case that may have been protective. So I think it could have made a difference, right? And I think about many other scenarios. I think about Mimi Torres. And yes, that's all still being unfolding in many different investigative forums. But if there was more required than, if there was more that was expected, would things have unfolded the way they did with the school system? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But I think there's a possibility that the answer may be no. If there was some requirement that there be a credible demonstration that a child is elsewhere receiving equivalent instruction, would that deter some of the things that we see? I think the answer is yes. Will it deter all of it? I'm sure no. But some of it, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.